be able to do to actually force myself to actually stay within the 15 minutes, but also to ensure when I don't, that you actually get the points I'm trying to make. Because I'll tell you what I'm going to talk about on the front end, I'll tell you what the conclusion is, and then we'll fill it in the middle. At least you can write the rest of the story if I don't get there. So the first piece, I want to talk about my dad and his relationship with Ava Gardner. I never quite understood anything about what was going on in their respective lives until I did that. But actually, I do want to tell a story about my dad at the risk of being somewhat redundant. My dad was somewhat different than the others we talked about. I also want to talk about Muhammad Yunus in a speech that he gave a year ago. So first, let me start with Muhammad Yunus, then I'll get to my dad, and then we'll get to the closure. So first, Muhammad Yunus. Muhammad Yunus gave a throwaway line. It was one of those emotional tearjerker lines in the context of a speech about social enterprise and microfinance. And he said, "We are all entrepreneurs, only too few people get to practice it." Now that's a beautiful, beautiful line, and it makes for actually great poetry in the context of a speech. And you walk away and say that was actually wonderful. And I've spent the better part of the last year and a half since I kind of heard about that speech saying, what if in fact he was right? Can we turn the mic back on? No, I'm a college president who wants nothing I say to ever be recorded. I'm going to be provocative. So this is like the on switch?
Oh, that's so cool.
No one has ever said louder. So what if in fact we actually took this seriously, okay? And that we began to recognize that we are all entrepreneurs, okay? What would we do with that throwaway line, and how would we organize both academic institutions and practical institutions of all kinds to be able to deliver on that promise and recognize the economic and social value that would be created by millions and billions of people acting in an entrepreneurial fashion? So that's the front end. That's the challenge that I want to be able to deal with in the context of the stories that I'm going to play with you about today. The second piece is actually very, very basic and linked to the first, which is in contradistinction to what it is that most people who think about design and innovation play as the prevailing organizing logic, which is driven by economists. As you understand, entrepreneurship and innovation are all acts of creative destruction that exist in markets, and at the intersection of market curves, somehow we're going to find opportunities. Suppose in addition to being able to find opportunities and to train all of us to be able to kind of use all of these data sources to be able to find those points of intersection, suppose we actually recognize that alongside the ability to find, human beings were actually capable of making markets. Right? In ways that absolutely fly in the face of conventional economics. And as you understand, conventional economics has served us so well over the last 24 months. It should not be subject to challenge in any way, okay? But nonetheless, okay, if we just throw away the basic logic of rationality and homo economicus, which actually is proved to be completely irrelevant in the context of the groups that we have here or any other irrational human group that exists in mankind, suppose we just said human beings make markets. So that's the end point, okay? So the front end is if we were all entrepreneurs, and the second is embedded in that if we actually recognize that human beings make markets. So there's the whole presentation. If you need to go on a break, the rest of it is just the filler. So story number one. One of the things that you get to do when you're a new college president is you have to explain your life, okay? And I have to explain my life, unlike Stephen Trachtenberg, who was a dean, an associate faculty member, an associate dean, then a small college president, then a large college president. There's a marvelous sense of linearity associated with it. And what happens to me is I started out working, and then I went and got a doctorate, and then I actually stayed as a faculty member for 10 years at Harvard Business School, and then I left and I took a job doing something. And then I sold out of doing something, and I went back and taught at Harvard Business School for another 10 years. I'm a slow learner. And went through that process. And then I came down here to Providence and helped out at Brown, my alma mater, for a year. And then I went to another job for about 8 or 9 years. And then I became a college president. And people find that quizzical. My last job, obviously, was vice chairman and chief operating officer of Limited Brands, so largely responsible for outfitting the women of the world with lingerie and fragrant body goop of all kinds, and occasionally clothing. But it was an $11 billion enterprise, 160,000 people, 5,000 stores. And so the question is, what relationship has that got to actually being president of an institution that's known worldwide for being number one in entrepreneurship, the undergraduate level for 13 years, the graduate level for 17 years, and is known, obviously, worldwide as the finest business school between 128 and 495. And so what ends up happening is we go through this exercise, and I have to explain myself to trustees when I want to get a job. I have to explain myself to alumni who are wondering what it is you're all about, et cetera, and so forth. And I said, in essence, what I've been trying to do is I've been trying to reconcile what it is that I know, okay, what it is that I know as a result of being an academic in a variety of different settings, and then confirm or disconfirm what it is I know by doing, okay? So I start and I do a whole bunch of research and develop a whole bunch of inquiry in the applications of socio-technical systems designed to services, and the way I resolve it is by running a 19-unit restaurant chain and trying to grow that. Then I'm convinced I've learned a whole bunch of other things and I've cracked the multi-location problem. I go back to academia for 10 years and I actually learn it's a little more subtle, a little more complex than what I thought, but I tested across a portfolio of 5,000 stores. And now I'm back with all of that background and knowledge trying to lead an institution that purports to actually be really good at entrepreneurship. And in the process of going through all those exercises, my father, a Holocaust survivor, barely literate, an upholsterer, but you know, it doesn't matter, all of those things, we still all, particularly as you can tell for older Jewish males this morning, have this deep need to get appreciated by our fathers. And so what ends up happening, and most of the people here are just working out their own stuff on stage till the light goes on. And so here I am too, okay? So all I wanted for my dad to do was to say, God, what you do is so incredibly important and you do it so well. I'm sure most of you are actually looking for that, okay? And most of you will continue to look for that if you have a father like mine, okay? And so I invited him to a talk where I actually talked about the kind of stuff that we talk about here without talking about him. And this was at the time I was worrying about customer-facing industries and co-creation, et cetera, and so forth. And so I had a group like this, and I kind of stood up, and I kind of built a matrix on the wall and was screaming at people. And I said, so you want to know what to do? Yeah. Find out who your customers are. Great. Write that down. Find out what they want. Write that down. And give it to them. And all the rest of it was commentary. That was an hour. And they all wrote it down, and they applauded. And I went right through the crowd to my dad, who was sitting in the back. And I kind of turned to him, and I said, so, Dad, what'd you think? He goes, so this is what you do? I said, yeah, this is what I do. He goes, these people. Yeah, he says, they seem to like it. I said, yeah, but I'm talking about you, Dad. What do you think? He goes, you want to know what I think? I said, yeah, cut the crap, Dad. He says, come on, what do you think? He goes, these people, he says, they didn't know this? Yeah, okay, I sit there and say, well, you know, for some of them it was completely new. For others it was a useful refresher. So what do you think? He goes, son, every morning when you wake up, you should start the day singing God Bless America. The fact that you can actually make a living kind of talking about this stuff from all of this theoretical stuff is just complete nonsense, okay? He goes, and I said, oh, thank you. Thanks for the recognition. Thanks for the support. Thanks for the adulation, okay? But the reality is there's a certain element of truth there, which is we've been spending all of our time talking about knowing to doing, and all of us understand the inconsistencies between what it is we know and what it is we do in all sorts of fronts of life, not the least of which are situations that you're dealing with here. Suppose, in fact, we reversed the logic, and we actually started talking about going from doing to knowing, and embedded in lots of the conversations here over the last couple of days is, in fact, at least speculation about the impact of doing on knowing versus the impact of knowing on doing, and the only thing it does is fly in the face of the scientific method, but who's for us to quibble? So what I want to basically argue is that we've in fact reached some of the natural limitations of the scientific method, and what we have to do is develop a complementary logic. And that complementary logic is in fact that which explains much of which we call entrepreneurship. And in fact, that method is documentable, codifiable, and teachable to anybody. And since it's documentable, codifiable, and teachable to anybody, we can in fact realize Muhammad Yunus's promise of actually realizing that the whole world are entrepreneurs and actually teaching them how to practice it, and then consequently realize the economic and social value that comes from that activity. And this little school that's known as the finest school between 128 and 495, 13 miles west of Boston, can actually be the epicenter of a network of people that are actually devoted to creating economic and social value everywhere, and in fact change the world, which is a lot neater being the president of a small school that's under-endowed, tuition-dependent, chronically under-resourced, and always with a community, whether it be faculty, staff, or students, of being under-attended to and under-resourced. So one thing is we really can change the world, and all we need to do is actually reverse knowing doing into doing knowing, and I think we have ample justification for that, and I'll give you a perfect example of that. Through a detailed analysis of serial entrepreneurs using cognitive science methodologies, a doctoral student under the tutelage of Herb Simon by the name of Sarah Sarasvathy, who's a faculty member down at the Darden School, studied 27 entrepreneurs and really studied them in depth and began to compare them to MBA students, undergrad students, real people inside real organizations. And as part of the equation, she used this basic 2x2 matrix. Now, obviously, one of the things we're trying to do is how do you take an academic who embeds a story with a 2x2 matrix? All I'd like you to do is imagine a 2x2 matrix. I'm not going to write it on the wall, okay? Now, on this 2x2 matrix, because I want to get it right, so just keep imagining it, okay, is on the vertical axis, it goes from unknown to known, and it's called product. On the horizontal axis, it goes from known to unknown, and it's called market. And the question really is, where do really great serial entrepreneurs want to play? Right? And the answer is, right? Where? See, he's got it all fantasized. He's got it upper right. I don't know where upper right is. This is the unknown, unknown. Right? Unknown, unknown. And so it turns out when I look at the entrepreneurial textbooks, okay, that talk about the process of business planning and analytics, all based on a prediction model that's completely steeped within the confines of the scientific method, in the unknown, unknown quadrant, you know what they call it? Suicide. But it turns out when we study these serial entrepreneurs, they love to play in the suicide quadrant. And when we ask them why, they say two things. One is, there's not a lot of traffic. Okay? You know, when you call it suicide quadrant and you teach legions of business school students stay away from the suicide quadrant, it means you're going to get to play by yourselves. Okay? The second piece of it is they have enough confidence in their ability as human beings to actually depend on human agency as the source of all creative acts. Now think about that. That's really pretty interesting. Some of you came by airplane, right? Who came by airplane here? Great. So that assumes you're going to leave by airplane. You're going to go to the airport, whether it be Logan or TF Green Airport tomorrow. Let's just suppose you're taking a US Airways flight. Okay? So we want to add some pressure. And you remember, US Airways is the airline that had Sully, the pilot we all know and love, okay? The guy who landed a plane in the Hudson River. And it was only because there was a 3-hour delay to get into LaGuardia. The story's never told correctly. But it turns out one of the things that we've understood about aircraft design at this point is that it really is possible. The aeronautical and astronautical engineers and the folks of the airline companies will tell you that there already exist unmanned aircraft that are safer than manned aircraft. Already exists. So let's just suppose you go to TF Green Airport tomorrow, you're going on a US Airways flight, and it's not a budget-cutting move, but as you walk on the plane, they say, it's wonderful today, you're getting to fly on an unmanned aircraft. Because we know it's safer. We know, right? We have empirical support. Scientists have documented it. There are articles written. Those articles have been accepted for peer review. Right? We know. So how many of you are getting on the airplane? Yeah, by and large, I find one crazy person who just has some curiosity or a large insurance docket. Okay, but by and large, people won't go. They say, well, you know, what are you going to, well, I'd rather trust a human being. Even though human beings are uncertain, unpredictable, and incapable of being able to express all the perfection associated with being able to kind of fly this airplane, yep, I'd rather trust a human being. Now that's really interesting. The second group says, well, how do they know? Right? They say they know, but who are they? And how do they know? And they don't trust peer-reviewed Jeff Reed articles as ample proof. But at the end of the day, what we recognize is there's a fundamental belief in the power of human agency associated with most optimists in the room. And so as a consequence, what if we actually design an educational process to be able to realize that, linked to this notion I had that people can make markets? Third issue, uncertainty. Why we're increasingly uncertain about what we know. Richard Saul Wurman talked about 1921. Again, I thought this is great because I was going to talk about 1921 also, but I was going to talk about 1921, not 1921. And in 1921, Frank Knight, for those of you that remember 1921 vividly, conducted a series of experiments on uncertainty. And one of the things he did is we've actually been able to engineer the reconstruction of these experiments here today, where we actually kind of have Hershey Kisses in a bag, and we have light Hershey Kisses and dark Hershey Kisses. We put 10 light ones and 10 dark ones in a bag, and we ask somebody to pick and predict whether they want to have light or dark. Okay, and they sit there and say, okay, this is really very simple. They say, I'm indifferent. Right? Because there are 10 lights and there are 10 darks in the bag, okay? So what we know from probability and statistics is you're indifferent. So then we'll exercise a preference function, say I'll pick dark because I prefer dark. Then you pick in, you get a dark, this is great, you get to pick again. What do you want now? Now we know there are more lights than there are darks. There's a 1.8% probabilistic differential. Does your preference function outweigh the probabilities? Shit, I just like dark. So they pick again, they get light, it's all over. But we have all of the knowledge necessary to improve the quality of our predictions in that game. Now, suppose I actually just dumped a whole bunch of Hershey Kisses in a bag. You didn't see whether it was 10 or 10, and you actually didn't even know what colors I put in the bag, and I went to you and said light or dark. And you picked the first one, you said light, and you got an orange one. And we throw the orange one back in. The question is, what do we know at this point? We know that we have a bag loaded with stuff that has one orange Hershey Kiss. That's all we know. The question is, how long do you have to play that game before you actually think you understand what's going on? And the realities is, most mathematicians, most financial people, and most economists will tell you if you play that game long enough, they could begin the process of being able to model it to increase the quality of your prediction. Do you really want to trust that? That's the same mathematical modeling that had a few statistical errors in it when it gave rise to the failure of hedge funds because, oops, we missed the definition there. And the reality is we have this illusory logic that says we can in fact predict the future and the world's getting uncertain to the point of being unknowable. And the question is, what's the corollary logic to assist people in taking action in an highly uncertain to the point of unknowable world? And again, the only point is human action. The only point is human action. So what are we trying to do as an institution? What opportunities does it raise for people like you? And what's the nature of the story about what it is we try to do at a place like Babson? Babson's number one in entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is an academic discipline. It's an academic discipline like all other academic disciplines. It apes the social sciences in every way. We write articles just the same way. We have peer review just the same way. We have journals just the same way. Suppose if you were number one and you were going to engage in the process of competitive dynamics to cement and extend your competitive position, what would you do? So what it is we've done, we've changed the notion of entrepreneurship discipline. It's still there and they still do what they do. But to say all that we do in an institution like Babson, we do under the umbrella of entrepreneurial thought and action. And entrepreneurial thought and action is in fact documentable, codifiable, and teachable to anybody. In our environment where we charge $50,000 a year, we have some uniquely localized attributes that justify the economic value associated with the $50,000 cost. And now, obviously, having listened to Stephen Trachtenberg, for the 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds who are on campus in the summertime doing sports camps, amazingly what will happen is you have entrepreneurial soccer camps for 4-year-olds because we got to generate revenue somehow. And maybe we'll even have students. But nonetheless, what we're doing is a faculty and a community of faculty and students are coming to grips with the fact that they can do what they do underneath the umbrella of a logic that sits alongside the scientific method and doesn't replace it. It doesn't replace it, but it complements it. And it essentially argues that the world is sufficiently complex and there are enough things that are currently unknowable that we've got to provide people with a complementary logic, and all of us have got to get substantially more intellectually ambidextrous if, in fact, we're going to be able to innovate and, more importantly, create in the world that we're all a part of. And that creation presumes that something doesn't exist. Okay? Co-creation generally assumes there's an idea to play off of. The only question that exists for us right now in the act of stimulating creation is not whether it's feasible, it's economically desirable, not even whether you can do it. The only question at stage one is, do you want to do it? And if you want to do it, there's no question we have a methodology that comes from and is derived from successful serial entrepreneurs that can help you to think about how to take the first step, how to move from doing to knowing rather than knowing to doing, how to cut risk, how to engage other people in the process, and how to expect and, in fact, leverage the unexpected in the process of making it going. And that I'll tell you next year. Thanks very much.